Hello and happy holidays. My name is Marie, and I'm going to do my rant on the HBO series And Just Like That, episode 4, titled Some of My Best Friends. First, spoiler alert. I am going to spoil the heck out of this show like I do all the shows, so if you don't like to know what goes on, don't listen to my rants. Another thing, I'm going to say a trigger warning, and I'll get into a detailed trigger warning at the end of my episode rant to discuss the Chris Noth sexual assault allegations. So let's begin. This episode starts off with Carrie waking up in her old single woman apartment, which is filled with boxes and what appears to be some sort of pet pillow next to her bed when she wakes up. And of course, it holds the world's oldest coffee maker. Didn't quite understand this. This apartment was, I don't understand why it's all packed up, since Sex and the City 2, the movie, they show that they kept this apartment open and decorated for anybody who needed time away from their kids or time away from each other. So I was kind of surprised to see it as boxed up as it was, but who knows? Things move on. Last week I found out that Patricia Fields was not doing the costume for this series, which was surprising because honestly, it looks like she does, right? Like the costumes and the style choices are fairly similar. It's pretty seamless. So I haven't had time. It's the holidays. I've been busy. I haven't had time to figure out who's, to take the 10 seconds it takes to IMDb search who does the costumes for this series. But it's pretty interesting. They're kind of back to the old tropes. You see Carrie leave her apartment in an old sweater and a gigantic crinoline skirt, like she's going to do some sort of ballet in an ugly sweater, which is very on brand for her. Same with Charlotte and her giant sleeved Stepford wife look that she's got going now, and these sort of open basket purses that let you see everything she's carrying. That's a little brave. I could never do that. In this episode, we see Charlotte at her most Charlotte. She's got to create events. She's got to have everything absolutely perfect. She spent weeks tracking down botanists. Is that really a thing people do? I mean, to be rich and cultured in Manhattan, it's got to be kind of exhausting. Spending weeks and weeks so that your friends can talk to botanists for the kids. How fun. But of course, Charlotte has to plan the perfect spontaneous dinner party, which, by the way, we all knew this was going to get canceled, right? Like, we knew that they were going to set her up for this big sort of fall, like, oh, you're going to do all this planning and control all these people and really irritate every person of color that to create this perfect, quote-unquote, spontaneous dinner party that, of course, you just knew it was going to get canceled. Very kind of the sitcom formula thing. Later, we see the girls having dinner, Charlotte, Carrie, and Miranda, and they're all basically talking about their plans for the week. Can you come to this dinner party I'm throwing for LTW? Seems cool. And then Miranda is all excited. She's having dinner with her professor. And of all the relationships that they're introducing with people of color, this one seems the most forced, the professor relationship. And I'll get into their conversation later, which I thought was an amazing and frankly brutally honest conversation about motherhood and those sort of expectations. But is it kind of normal for students and professors to hang out? I always thought that there was maybe, I went to trade school myself. I always thought there might be, some like student favoritism or impropriety. I thought that there was like sort of a boundary between professors and students. I was kind of surprised that, they'd be in a dinner together. If you guys went to university and had, personal one-on-one dinners with your professors, let me know. It just sort of seems like a weird thing that wouldn't happen from an outside perspective. And of course, another surprising friendship is Carrie's new friend, her real estate agent. And again, Seema seems like a real swell gal, and they had some meaningful conversations there. It's just again just the setup of it. Who wants to befriend their real estate agent? Real estate agents, they lie. Like, even the nicest ones, they'll just lie right to your face. You could drive up. I've never had one not lie to me. Like, you drive up to an apartment. It's been snowing for 2 days. There's not any, footprints coming to or out of the property. No one's seen it for ages. But like, oh no, somebody was just here looking at this, and they're just really ready to buy. I have never once met a non-lying real estate agent, so that just seems again like a very weird relationship foot to step off on. But I do dig Seema right off the bat. I love how she's all, oh, your wallpapers are all so stunning, they have to come down. She's right though, beige sells, so get rid of the brutalist coffee table screaming, I'm not you. Yeah, absolutely. And again in this episode, like, how evil do they need to make Peloton seem? I mean, they really bring it up a lot. They hammer into it. They're like, okay, she gives the Peloton away to the doorman. And then Seema comes in and says, it would really tie this giant spa-like bathroom together, a Peloton. And she finds a way to sneak a Peloton back into Carrie's life. Like, Peloton now just viscerally for me represents doom and death. It is the worst product placement ever. And after they're done touring the apartment, Seema reintroduces Carrie to one of her oldest, dearest friends, cigarettes. And now Carrie is back to smoking. And, she's still on those back pills, I'm sure. And Miranda is definitely an alcoholic and now getting into pot, maybe. I think we're going to see addictions as some great themes for this series. And you know what? At a point when you're so old, I mean, doesn't matter. Like, I always figured, I'm not a smoker myself, but if I started smoking when I'm 70, like, who cares? Or maybe, like, I always figured when I turn 85, maybe I'll start up a heroin addiction. Like, what else have I have to do? And that's a really reductive viewpoint of how older people live their lives and their health issues. I know, I don't mean to offend. Then, of course, Carrie goes back to the podcast. And here I'm really kind of bummed because we've seen Miranda and now we've seen Che. And no new information since the last episode, because I was wondering, after Che shotgun Miranda, did anything else happen? Did they go to bed together? Or was it just the shotgun and then they just like leave it alone and go about their business? I guess that's what happened, because no other mention of her and Miranda's, I don't know what you want to call it, an encounter? Maybe it's too innocent to call it an encounter yet. And then we go into this long extended piece of Charlotte being her most obnoxious Charlotte self, hassling Harry about how many people of color they can bring to this dinner gathering, hassling her neighbor, hassling Anthony, who sees right through her bullshit. Charlotte is a lot. Of course, then we go to Miranda having dinner with her professor, which is honestly, we're finally kind of getting into, in my opinion, what made Sex and the City such a great series. Just sort of brutally honest and insightful conversations among women. When they're talking about sort of societal expectations versus what they actually want. And I found this conversation just incredibly real and engaging. And anybody who has raised or help raised a teenager can understand Miranda's pain for sure. Personally, I'm lucky. I stand on that kind of perfect line in my life where I am a stepmother and we don't have primary custody. So, I get to pursue my career. I enjoy my life, but I also get to do some of the fun mother stuff and have influence over, children's lives. But I also see the negative side. I know when teenagers just want to drive you to drink, like, I don't want to blame Miranda's drinking problem on Brady. That's not fair. But, yeah, being called a bitch isn't fun. Actually, I'm joking. I've never been called a bitch by my stepdaughters. Very cool, actually. But still, they have those moments. And, parenthood is, I think most people think they're worth it, but you're finding more and more mothers now who aren't good mothers who say they kind of regretted having kids. And it used to be really something you were never allowed to say or mention. But you're starting to see it more and more on television and things. Like you see like Succession. I had a friend whose mom said that, she wasn't a good mom. She shouldn't have had children. And there have been articles coming out. I think more women are discussing how really motherhood is not for everyone. It truly is not. It is a huge sacrifice. Motherhood is basically putting yourself second at all times. And that sparks resentment in a lot of women. So I thought that this was a very cool, very honest conversation. And this whole thing of, well, I have a pretty good life, but I feel like I might be missing out, the woulda, shoulda, coulda. And the problem is it's just so impossible to go down every path. I wish I could live every life, but I only have the one. There's always going to be paths I just don't have the time or energy to go down. And I think sometimes having it all means saying I don't want certain things. And, not having it all, I think that's how you have a fulfilling life, is just realizing who you are and what you really want and being honest with that and not really pressuring into what people are going to tell you think you want. Meanwhile, Carrie and Seema's relationship seems to be steering us back into another major aspect of Sex and the City, which is dating. Carrie, through Seema's eyes, starts to see what a new dating life could be like. And, Big has only been dead for a few weeks. I don't think that Carrie's really considering it now. She's had her first encounter with a single guy wanting to show her a bedroom like right away. That weirdo members only jacket creeper jumping over a bearskin rug to talk to her. No, not fun. But yeah, I can imagine dating. Granted, I did the whole dating thing in my 30s and all the dating apps and, or at least Plenty of Fish, I think it was, when I was out there. There are a lot of dating horror stories. It seems it was exhausting in my 30s, but I can only imagine what it would be in your 50s. I don't know that I would have the strength or the interest in doing it at all as a widow. I don't know. You guys tell me what you think. More and more we're finding studies. There are women just over 50. They don't want to get married. They don't even want to live with a guy. I've been seeing so many articles of, women just saying, "Oh, if we're gonna get married, fine, but you're gonna live like down the block from me. I'm not living with you. I'm not gonna be your mommy." I feel like women in their 50s aren't as excited to date. Like they're just happy to be alone and read some good books and have some good girlfriends, and that their interest in having marriages wane. That's what I've just sort of noticed. I don't know if any of you guys. I'd love to hear your comments on this subject. If people really want to get into dating in their 50s and 60s, at least from a female perspective. So Harry and Charlotte then go to LTW's dinner party that she's having with her husband and nitpicky mother-in-law. And it actually kind of becomes a real celebration of Black art, starting from their elevator conversation about Black authors such as Zadie Smith. But really, like, the paintings in that apartment are pretty incredible. She references Gordon Parks photos, which I think are pretty cool. But the paintings that they have in there by Deborah Roberts and Micheline Thomas, those are incredible. Kind of feels like, for the amount of money and the talent in these paintings, that LTW could have like a Kehinde Wiley. Like, if I don't know, but I feel like those go for a lot more money. But just the artwork in that apartment, and it still just makes me think, wow, Charlotte really does love art, and she used to run this art gallery. I'll never understand how her apartment was always so plain in the original series. Like, everything was just plain white, and she had like no art on the walls and didn't discover like art and color until she had kids. Always mystified me. But then we get to this weird scene where Carrie is back in her apartment. She's putting Big's ashes in her closet until she can figure out where he really wants to be. And she hasn't even opened the box yet. So normally within the box, they usually have, even standard, they're going to give you like a nice carved wooden urn. They're going to give you something. So it's unusual that she hasn't even opened the brown box to see what Big's ashes are encased in. But then it gets weird. She goes over to her bedroom, the side of her bed, and waiting there is a note from Stanford. Like, does Stanford have a key to her apartment? Does he just let himself in and out? And if so, if all these people are letting themselves in and out of her house, how come everything's like in boxes with like really old coffee machine? Like, I'm not getting the dynamics of the Carrie apartment. But Stanford leaves her a note with like the worst handwriting ever. I paused that bad boy and I was trying to read it, and I could barely understand that he was in Tokyo. But he writes like a doctor. And here we know that Willie Garson has passed away. They had to come up with some sort of, final line for him. And on one hand, it is kind of a rushed ending. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things where I genuinely feel sorry for the writers. Like, this is a real tough one to write yourself out of. You've had Stan. Stanny has been so prominently featured in these episodes. It looked as though they were really kind of using him to fill that Samantha void. And then all of a sudden he passes away. And you've got to come up with some sort of satisfying conclusion about that. And I feel like they probably were planning a whole big arc between him and his husband, Anthony. They probably had a lot in store for him, and then had to just write him out in a way that was respectful to the memory of Willie Garson and to that character, and something that was kind of permanent. So this is a tough one. It does still kind of feel, and I think it always was going to, I don't think there's any way not to make it feel sort of a rush job, but they kind of rushed him off. But at least it ended on a laugh, that he gave a divorce letter to Anthony, and Anthony's like, I thought, we were so happy after all that fighting. So it did elicit a chuckle, and I'm like, okay, at least Danny is leaving on a laugh, which I think is honestly the most we can hope for. So I will say I do pay attention whenever a human being dies on a TV show. I do very closely pay attention to however they send it off. Like, I think in this one, it's like in loving memory of Willie Garson, and they show not the most flattering photograph of him at the end, but it was clearly the photograph that, like, one of their final scenes with him. So I think they did a nice job as well as could be expected. I can only imagine the shock and grief and having to write through that. So I'm not gonna give these people too hard of a time. That's a really difficult situation. I thought some of these final girlfriend conversations were really great. Charlotte with LTW discussing how both of them were nervous that, you know, LTW nervous that Charlotte would be the only, and Harry were going to be the only white couple at her party, and Charlotte's like vice versa. Although Charlotte went first, I thought that was, you know, kind of very cute and honest. And the heartbreaking discussion between Carrie and Seema, you know, when a woman just sort of, you know, when people kind of in their grief irrationally go off on really small things, and, you know, talking about insensitive to say, you know, still putting yourself out there that you've never, you know, you're this older woman, you've never been married and never divorced, and, you know, calling her happily never divorced, I think is very valid. That means that, you know what, you know, you don't want to get a divorce, trust me. It's a win in life if you never get divorced, even if that means never getting married. Absolutely. Divorce is the worst. But yeah, I thought that this was a very kind of touching conversation about, you know, things that are very important. You know, love is love is all there is, really. But I was very moved by their conversation. So, trigger warning. We have to discuss, I'm just going to hit on this, Chris Noth. The actor who played Mr. Big has been accused of sexual assault by multiple women. So if you are triggered by sexual assault or rape allegations, you're going to want to turn this part off for sure. But yes, Christopher Noth, the actor who played Mr. Big, multiple women have come out. And again, we're seeing this sort of Me Too trend where these women are coming out and they have sort of remarkably similar stories. These women didn't know each other. They reported it at different times. But for some reason, like the two big accusers, the two big rape accusers, they both told The Hollywood Reporter, which is interesting. Like, that would be the source that both of them would go to, and I don't know why for that. But we're finding out more and more, and some of this stuff apparently was just sort of hiding out in plain sight. You know, former supermodel Beverly Johnson was his girlfriend, and at the time, in the mid-90s, was very publicly talking about his abusive patterns to the point that she even filed a restraining order on him. This was covered by the National Enquirer, so of course people are already, you know, apt to judge the validity of that. But she said that she accused him of, you know, being very violent with her, of calling her 25 times a day, threatening to mutilate her and kill her dog. And this was made public in the mid-90s, but nobody really knew who Chris Noth was. He wasn't a big deal. He wasn't famous yet, so I don't know that it would get much traction. Now, accuser then came out, who calls herself Zoe. I don't know that these are their real names. I think these might be just sort of pseudonyms for now. Zoe, her story was pretty compelling. She claims that she was working at some sort of agency that in New York that deals with a lot of, you know, celebrity clients and actors, things like that. And she was basically like an administrative assistant. She was very young. She was 22 years old. This is when Chris Noth is already Mr. Big, and he's like 49 years old. And he's immediately hitting on her and starts talking about her career. And he's really always fascinating in these women's careers when he talks to them, apparently. Allegedly. And he invited her to, like, I guess they were like swimming in a pool or something at this apartment. And he brings her into the apartment and he kisses her, and she's like, "Oh, that's so cool. I kissed Mr. Big. Now I'm going to leave now." And her friend's waiting outside in the car. She's not like there to stay. And apparently at this point, Chris Noth allegedly, rapes her from behind and in front of a mirror and causes her to bleed to the point that she needs stitches. And she comes out of there just very, very shaken. She comes out of the apartment shaken. Her friend, who is now a clinical psychologist, recognized immediately that there was something really wrong with her friend. She takes her to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. They get the sex rape, they get I guess, like the rape kit or, whatever they do to treat women. But she had to have stitches from him raping her from the back, allegedly. And, they called the cops. She refused to report who it was because he was so famous. She was worried about her job and her reputation. But, she told her friend, she told her boss at the time, so that she wouldn't have to see, I guess, Chris Noth again. So she has kind of witnesses and, theoretically, hospital records, although I guess Cedars-Sinai say they don't keep records past 10 years. Now, all this stuff kind of occurred in, while Chris Noth was married, by the way. So apparently his marriage is on shaky ground. The second accuser, her name, she goes by Lily. Again, I don't know that it's her real name. At the time, this would be in 2015. Again, I guess Chris Noth has been married since like 2012. So she said that at the time she was 25 years old and he was 60. And she was working as a VIP in a nightclub in New York. And he asked her out to dinner. He invited her out to dinner. And again, started talking to her about her career and all these different kind of career options, that sort of thing. And then he invites her afterwards to his apartment in New York because he wants to show her some really good whiskey. And this woman kind of admits, "I can't believe I didn't think anything of it. I thought we were just talking our careers and having a glass of whiskey," and she feels incredibly stupid. But again, same sort of MO. Although he starts hitting on her and she says, "Aren't you married? Don't you have children?" And he had a child at the time, and told her that he thought marriage was a sham, and then again proceeds to violently rape her from behind in front of a mirror. So the third accuser says that she was 18 years old. Now, what I find interesting is Chris Noth categorically denies all these charges. He says everything's consensual. The third accuser, he claims he's never even met. And this girl, or this woman now, she says when it happened, he was 55 and she was 18 years old. And still details are emerging with that one. But Chris Noth says that he never even met that third person, the 18-year-old. But that all other acts were consensual, which would still say, okay, he really went after these very young women, some of whom were kind of in more of a professional thing, although I'll give a pass for that. But he was married at the time. It's still not looking great for Chris Noth. So, innocent until proven guilty. And I know that he has lost his, he's lost, I guess he got fired from his job on The Equalizer. I was surprised to know that The Equalizer was still around. And his agency has dropped him. And there are a lot of people going out saying, this isn't fair, this isn't right, you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's absolutely true. However, you also don't know what these agencies and these TV shows are really genuinely facing. I do want to remind anybody listening to this that, Bill O'Reilly was fired on Fox News only after it became public that Fox had already paid off millions and millions of dollars to several different women for sexual harassment allegations. So you never know. These agencies, his agency, the Equalizer, they may have already had some uncomfortable moments with Noth. You don't know. I mean, they might already be like, okay, the accusers have come out. Okay, we can't handle this guy anymore. He's clearly a liability. Because a lot of times when people are powerful, especially men in powerful positions, they do get a level of protection. By the time things get public, there's usually already okay, we've had some problems with this guy. And I don't know that that's the case, but again, we're starting to see more and more women come out, and people like women on Twitter, and again, they could just be fly-by-nights, they could be just, attention seekers who've never met Chris Noth. I don't know, but we're starting to see people say, okay, yeah, I worked for his nightclub. He owned a bunch of nightclubs and apparently would date women who worked for him, young women who worked for him at his nightclub. When, again, if that's true, even consensual, super creepy. And, apparently there's a lot to be said apparently about his drinking. He drinks a lot. He drinks on the set. So a lot of stories are coming out of kind of a unraveled, unhinged guy. So again, it could be all fake. And by the way, if you think that this is all fake and you think he's being set up, I would have to think it's the people by Peloton doing it, right? Like, if by any chance this is all just a giant hoax to get Chris Noth, I think the motivation behind it really has to be that Peloton plans on putting out an ad saying, "We killed Mr. Big, that we kill sexual predators." I don't know. I'm just trying to think of why all these women would come out and tell such startling similar stories, like who has it out for Chris Noth, that would be the case whenever they're like, don't believe women. They also made a big deal this week to highlight what the actresses, Cynthia Nixon and Sarah Jessica Parker, and what's her name, the one that plays Charlotte, it escapes me now, but they wanted to make sure that these actresses spoke up, and it's one of those very basic standard boilerplate, we condemn any kind of sexual harassment, and we congratulate these women for speaking their truth and their strength, and we should believe, that sort of thing. Looked like a lawyer wrote it, but honestly, I don't care. I don't care what these women have to say. I don't care. I don't even know why they are being asked. I don't know why these actresses are, I feel pressured. I bet they felt pressured to put out some sort of statement. Who cares? It's another thing of let's put more burden on women for men's bad behavior. Why does Sarah Jessica Parker have to say anything about Chris Noth's behavior? She probably wasn't privy to it or aware of it. He probably wasn't doing it on the set. Guys like these tend to do their evil deeds way away from the women that run their paychecks, like they're not stupid. So she probably had no friggin' idea. Like, I got to comment on this? Like, ew. That would be my comment officially. It would be like, ew, I don't know. I liked him. He was nice to me. It's gross. I feel terrible about it. Of course I do. Why do I need to talk about it? Let him talk about it. He's the perpetrator. If he did this stuff, he needs to talk about it. Or if these women are just lying and making stuff up, then they need to be called out on it. But I get kind of tired of this whole notion that any woman that ever worked with a sexual abuser now feels, has this obligation to do more dancing. No, I'm tired of women being burdened for men's bad behavior. Men have bad behavior. They got to own up to it. They got to pay for it. Period. It has nothing to do with the women. It's usually very little to do with the women whatsoever when guys are this kind of gross and this kind of terrible. I get a little tired of it, and I'm glad for the Me Too movement. I'm glad that women finally just stood up and said, you know what, we're no longer taking this kind of crap. And yeah, some of this stuff is going to take longer to pull to the surface. Chris Noth hasn't been big in years. He hasn't been noticeable or powerful, or people haven't paid attention to him. So yeah, it starts to trigger people when you start getting all this fame for the Peloton bike. So that's apparently why these women started coming out again. They started freaking out when they saw him, because he hasn't really been on TV in a very noticeable way for these people since the movies, you know? And this all happened after that, apparently, or after the first series. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. I find it interesting, but yeah, I'm hoping. I'd like it not to be the case. I always had a crush on Chris Noth, and it is kind of gross. It's very sad if it's true, and disturbing. The stories are very disturbing. So you guys, on that note, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I'm hoping that the season still continues on this trajectory of just good, open, honest female conversations, and less of the Chris Noth Me Too stuff. Hopefully that dies down in the background a little bit so we can enjoy the series for sort of its more pure elements. Have a great weekend.